It's one thing to weather a storm, but it's another to rise above the aftermath. And my guest today has done that and so much more. Joining us from Puerto Rico, she is a third-generation dairy farmer, a lawyer, and most recently, a new mother, whose love for her family, community, and her cows has kept her fighting to build back their dairy farm. After 2 back-to-back hurricanes that left rural areas of this island without power and cell phone service for nearly 6 months in 2017. Her unwavering faith fueled her through this challenging time and shaped her into the leader she is today. I'm so very honored to introduce you to Kritzia López Arvelo, our first guest in the special series, International Women in Dairy, featured right here on the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. We are joining in the celebration because March is the month of honoring women around the world, with International Women's Day on March 8th. And the entire month is dedicated to the current and past and future generations of leaders as Women's History Month. And that's why I'm taking you on a trip around the world to meet a handful of women who may not even realize that they are writing their own page in the dairy history book, but who hold incredible stories of grit, grace, resilience, and passion that will leave you nothing short of empowered and inspired. Stories like Kris's. And I can't wait to share them with you on the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. The special series that I've been bringing to you through Up-Level Dairy Podcasts on International Women in Dairy is rooted in women who are doing incredible things in their farms, in their families, in their businesses. And our partner in bringing this series forward is Sue Heim from Quality Branding Solutions in Luxembourg, Wisconsin. And one of the reasons, Sue, that I wanted to bring you in as part of this series is because you believe in women like you who are business owners, who are leaders, and also balancing life and family at home as well. And this is nothing new for you. You've been a women-owned business for 35 years, right, Sue?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Peggy. I am truly honored to be part of the show today. Yes, we've been in business for 35 years. Started out actually that my mother owned the business originally, but it's been quite the journey, and that's truly what it is. We're women in business, we're women leaders, we are women strong, and I'm just honored to be part of your podcast.
Well, and Sue, equally honored to bring your voice forward to share with others as well. And so that's why I've asked you to bring forward a few pieces of wisdom and advice that you can offer to other women who are leaders and business owners, not just in dairies, but really in other industries as well and around the world with the reach of our International Women in Dairy series. What's your first piece of wisdom that you can share with other women about what it's like to be a leader in a business?
So 30 years ago was a little different than it is now. We have improved as being business leaders and being females that are strong and work hard. But my goal was also not only working harder, but what can we do to be more efficient? If you're doing the job in 70 hours, what can we do to not only take care of our family yet at home, but to be able to make things a little bit more efficient by delegating to your staff and seeing the right that they are doing, taking care of their talents and what they do and bring to the team. There's so many aspects on just truly being a leader that is not controlling, but contributing. So asking your staff, what can I do to help you do the best that you can with the talents that you have?
Sue, what an incredible piece of wisdom. But I hope other listeners out there can just take that and internalize it a little bit and ask ourselves, are we being a contributor within our businesses or are we being a controller? And how's that part of contributing to not just our adaptability to change, but also our own internal business culture? And with that, Sue, I look forward to jumping on with you again for your second piece of wisdom.
Thank you, Peggy. Looking forward to it.
Let's just start with a little intro. Okay. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Kritzia López Arvelo. I am from Camuy, Puerto Rico, currently residing in Quebradillas, Puerto Rico. We're a small island in the Caribbean. We're a U.S. territory, along with 4 other territories that the United States has. I am the third generation in my family to be involved in the dairy farm. It was actually started by my grandfather. My father is the one who currently operates it. We are Holstein breeders, we're brown Swiss breeders, and until recently, we used to be Jersey breeders as well. We were one of the very few dairy farms in the island that had all three major dairy farming breeds as breeders. So we're very involved in the Puerto Rico Dairy Holstein Association. I am a lawyer as a full time day job. I have my own law practice. We do work primarily civil matters, which are real estate transactions, corporations, administrative cases, and estate planning. We do work with a lot of clients in the mainland as well as Puerto Rico, or people that are inheriting, but they need, like, we are a dual civil jurisdiction. So the English language helps a lot to translate because things here are a little bit different because we used to be a colony of Spain. So that's presented an asset. And then I live in a mostly agricultural area. So I do work with a lot of agribusinesses, particularly dairy farmers as well, in estate planning and the business permitting as well. So that's a summary of me professionally as of December 2, when I closed to start my maternity leave. Now, on top of that, I'm a new mother of a 5-week old.
So your role has been expanded within the dairy industry because not only are you a third generation dairy farmer, you are a lawyer who deals with farms and agribusinesses, but now you're also mom of a future fourth generation dairy farmer.
Oh, God, I hope so. If the industry picks up, hopefully, now that I'm a mom, it's like you've always thinking you hope this preserves to the next generation, but now even more so with the economic aspect that dairy farmers are dealing with in regards to feed prices, petroleum, the cost of electricity went up here, which we do have one of the highest costs of electricity. So it's making it really hard for dairy farmers to keep the dairy farms open. And now that I'm a mom, it's like, will my daughter be able to grow up like I did? Will she be able to see like her grandfather in the farm? I saw my grandfather in the farm. So it's that whole, like, what can you do to preserve, like, from your little corner with what you know, how can you make sure that you're really trying to contribute to making this last? Because it is a real struggle for dairy farmers. I know not only here in Puerto Rico, but also in the United States and across the world. I have been privileged to meet dairy farmers in other countries, and there's some common grounds with like feed prices and everything because those are impacted by like rural events. And it's really a concern. It feels heavier now.
You're feeling it as a current farmer, as someone who works with a lot of other farms. As you mentioned, estate planning is something that is part of the services you provide, but also this new lens as you look through the eyes of the little girl that you have, little baby Amelia. And that's just perspective, doesn't it?
It changes. You're looking at the same things you used to, but now it's like you have other concerns, and it brings new challenges for sure. It changes your priorities.
If I were to walk onto your family's dairy, what would it look like?
Okay, so Puerto Rico is a Caribbean island. So from my travels to the mainland to see dairy farms there, it's going to look a lot more green. A lot of the dairy farms in Puerto Rico, because we can do pasture 365 days, are pasture based. We do rely on feed a lot compared to a fully pasture based farms because we're a tiny island. We're 100 miles wide by 35 miles long. So there's not much land here, and agricultural land in particular, it's very expensive compared to other parts of the mainland I say the mainland to refer to the continental United States. So land is very expensive here, and because of like poor planning, it's very hard to find vast amounts of agricultural land continuously, which means it's very hard to find like a 300-acre agricultural land for sale here. And if you do find, it's going to be very expensive. So we do pasture based, but we rely also on feed heavily because to be truly pasture based, we couldn't find, most farms wouldn't be able to find that amount of land. So it's going to look very green. I think one big event that happened here that sort of shifted how we do things was Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma. In our particular farm, Hurricane Maria and Irma came in around September 17 and September 21st of 2017. And we didn't get electricity back until the last day of February. So you learn to how to manage things. Like we didn't get cell phone signal until December, and you needed to really scale back and work with the basics. What can we do solely? Because even radio stations went out. So you need to like scale back. And I think a lot of dairy farms are marked by that as well. So adapting to new technology that's going to require electricity, internet, and that sort of thing, you already know you had a refresher of how to deal when those things and those commodities and those things that make it accessible weren't around. So at least in our farm, we've really managed to focus on how do we set up and how do we keep to be as efficient as possible, but also as resilient. Because not because you want it to, but two back-to-back hurricanes will make you put resiliency at the top of how you move forward. So we're always learning about what's new with technology out there and what new progresses and advances are there, but we're also very aware of how would this look with another category 5 hurricane. Is this sustainable, or if this is this going to be tech that we're not going to be able to use? We do have generators and all that, but after you kind of cut off international communication and you're sort of dealing with what you have and what you can do on the farm, because you can't even call a vet to come because there's no cell phone signal, you scale back and start thinking, how can I make things more efficient? And I think that's like the primary marker for most dairy farms in Puerto Rico compared to like many of the dairy farms that I go, where they have land to harvest their own feed and they can implement like very high tech things. I think that's a big marker specifically from 2017 coming now here. But there's a lot of humidity here, so that's something that we've worked into how we manage things, particularly dealing with like normal things like TT and that sort of thing, like healthcare with the cows, because cows aren't particularly like humid weather animals. So all those adaptations that require the humidity and then hurricane and how to really engage, because our hurricane season is quite long. So I think the first time I traveled to like a state where it really snow, I was so fascinated that they had incorporated things to deal with. Well, the wind in this time of the year comes from east to west. So now we have to have windows that shift. And these are like wind tunnels. But then we've adjusted these things for when the snow comes, because the snow is heavy and the roof can collapse. So you need to have, and you're like, wow, like all those adjustments that you have to make to the same thing that we do here. But obviously, snow is not a problem here. So I'm just like fascinated, like, oh, snow can be a problem too. Like, even though it's cooler for the cow, like that's going to cause some other adjustments to even how you set up a shed or the milking parlor. So those are the big factors to dairy farming in Puerto Rico. I think the medium size for a dairy farm in Puerto Rico is probably between 250 to 300 cows. And that might have changed in the last year or so, because I know a lot of dairy farms have shut down.
The scenario that you just laid out of what it was like during that time of the hurricane and after, where there was no electricity, not even cell phone service. I cannot imagine. Kris, you talked about what it was like for you to understand snow load and dealing with winter weather here in the US. But I would venture to say that very few farmers that I know can comprehend what it would have been like for an extended period of time to not have power or service. That had to be such a pivotal moment for you and your family. So humbling.
I think most people would describe the aftermath as apocalyptic. Like you got to the farm, like sheds were destroyed. Particularly where we are in the island, the hurricane came out through our town. So the eye of the storm passed here, even though it got in a category 5, by the time it passed here, it was a category 4. but it still did a lot of damage. We lost animals. We had lost all the feed that we had pre-purchased to deal because the storage or the shed where it was destroyed. So the rain came and the feed was all over the floor. So we could no longer use that. I think the first 30 days, you kind of like not processed anything because if you really sat down to process what was going on, you could have very well stayed in a corner and not done anything. I'm so thankful for that period of time to our employees because even in that circumstance, they still showed up to milk the cows, which is what you really want to in that period. Everything in the dairy farm operation reduces to just milking the cows. You're no longer concerned in that circumstance about breeding the cows or the AI program. You just want to make sure the cows are safe and the cows are being milked because you don't want them to dry out, which is something that happens in some of the dairy farms. Their cows dried out because they couldn't milk them. So you're just focusing on, are we doing the milkings like twice a day? Just having them show up, even though it's a family business, having them show up, it really just meant the world. And they were all hands in. We do have generators in the farm, but generators aren't meant to cover 6 months of electricity. Like things start to break down and not work. A lot of places didn't even have water. So we're lucky enough that we didn't have that issue, but just not having the electricity, you need to work with the generators, you need to secure diesel for the generators. You don't have a phone that you can call to get the diesel delivered. So you have to like physically try and contact the company, but there's like long lines to get gas. So you're really being like cautious about using your gas to things that could, because it could take you 12 hours to get gas for your car. At some point, there was a satellite signal that was set up like in a town square where I would go, like get to the farm like at 5 o'clock, and I would have a list of things, places that I would want to call and drive down to the center of town and park somewhere near the satellite so I could get some signal because it was very full from everybody trying to call, and just try to leave voicemails that the veterinarian would get, the feed company would get at some point the message and hopefully come and deliver feed and deliver. No ATM, no, everything you had to get was cash. So you had to go to the bank and withdraw cash amounts. So you all of a sudden you have to do payroll with cash because you're not going to give out a check to your employees if they're not going to be able to cash it. Like they're going to waste 4 hours or 5 hours in the bank trying to deposit the check. You have to pay for feed in cash. And there's also limitations to how much money you can withdraw because there's scarcity for cash because everybody's withdrawing cash. Things that were very simple got complicated, which is why I say we shifted to how sustainable and how resilient is what you're incorporating. Another thing that happened with us is that my dad got leptospirosis. So everything's broken down. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost their lives in this event. And rats is one of the animals that lost like their dwelling places. So they're trying to look for places to stay, and there's a lot of rummage they can settle into. And you're also doing cleanup. So that outbreak is very foreseeable in this type of circumstances. And thank God my dad was able to, the doctor identified it because she connected, well, dairy farmer, he's outside, and this is something foreseeable in the circumstances. So he probably has that. So they did labs and they sent him to the hospital. He was hospitalized for quite a few times. So at that moment, I had to stay in the farm. And all I knew, because there was no phone call to try and see like what his update was, all you knew was, okay, he's hospitalized because he left for the hospital, and I haven't heard or known anything about him for the longest period of time because there's no cell phone connection. People that actually kept their landlines, they were good because even if the poles were on the ground, they're still connected to the red. So people that had landlines had lines outside of their homes for people that wanted to use their phones to connect with family members. You're thinking 2017, it's the modern age, and all of that goes to down like with 12 hours.
Kris, this is just so hard to even comprehend. So this was going on now almost 8 years ago. But these are the things that will forever change not just a farm and not just the way you do business, but they change you. And you had to be a fairly young woman when this was all going on.
I think 27. Well, I had actually opened my office like on August 20th. So, like a month right before Maria, I had opened my own law practice. But the day after the hurricane, you just go there, everything's good. The courthouse system shut down. A lot of the government agencies aren't open. So, I can't really do much with my law practice during that time. So, I just went to check everything was good. But you can't, and I just said, I'll be back when I can be back. You can't do that with cows. They're living things. You have to feed them. You have to care for them. You have to make sure they have water. So much work fixing fences, the plumbing to go to the water tanks out on the field. You have to do all of that because a lot of it was damaged. You have to secure feed. You have to secure diesel. You have to go out to the bank to withdraw cash to pay the feed, to pay the employees. I remember just like looking for like a debris that we could use to do makeshift calf barns because one of the buildings that we had to have some of the calves, it had exploded, the walls collapsed because of the wind. So I just remember just like working all the time, but you needed to do that because like I mentioned, if you weren't like focusing on the next small task and you sat down for a second and really looked at the big picture, you would have stopped. Like, this is undoable.
But somehow you kept going and you got through it. And as you mentioned too, that your dad ended up getting sick during this time. Did you have to really step up even more because of that? You were getting things done, but somebody had to lead.
You don't really have a choice in that scenario. And it does make you step up. I think not trying to focus on like, how is my dad doing? And just focusing on the work is also allowing you to like not go in a corner and cry. It puts you in scenarios that you don't know that you're capable of doing until you're actually doing it and it's required for you to do. So it pushed me outside of what I usually do, but somebody has to do it. It's not even an option not to. So I remember just thinking like the cows have to eat, the cows have to be fed. That's the one thing, like everything else can fall, but that's the one thing. They have to be safe. I remember at one point, which is like very, I'm a very God centered person. So for me, obviously that was very important. But I remember at one point, we didn't have feed for the afternoon milking. And I had already gone down to the center of town and called the feed company a couple times, all three of the feed companies that we do have here in Puerto Rico. And I wasn't able to contact anybody. And I remember it was like almost about to start milking and the afternoon, and we had very little left. So I remember just like praying to God, like, am I the one that's going to ruin this? The cows are actually not going to have feed for the milking. And I just sat there drinking my coffee. And when I looked afar, I heard, because it was silent, there was no noise, there's no cars driving around. It's so silent, you could hear a pin drop. I heard sort of like a truck, and somehow somebody had heard about like my dad's name is Rafi. They had heard about what happened to my dad, and they knew Rafi's daughter was like trying to work with the farm to do what she could, and their cows had dried. So when the feed driver came, they told them like, hey, we're not milking the cows, go over to Rafi Lopez farm because they need the feed. If someone asked me like, how do you know like what keeps you, and I'm like, well, God sort of answers your prayers when you're like in dire need, and he just shows ways. So I think that's like, how did you do it? How for me, that's like very important. So sometimes I still think if I try to process over that period, I'm not sure I've gotten over it or I've emotionally processed it to the point. But you're definitely put in situations you don't think you can, or you've never imagined you can, and you just have to go with it. Thankfully, my dad came back to the farm after 2 weeks in the hospital. But that's a benchmark for Puerto Rico itself, but also in the dairy farm industry here. That's a huge benchmark to how we move and how we operate and how we've set up our farms. And then, of course, I'm always like a big believer that God's always going to place you where you have to be at the time you have to be so you can develop and acquire the skills that you need for where He's going to put you next. So you don't question where you are right now. You might not like it, you might not understand it, but you have to accept that it's part of a process of a bigger plan of where you're headed.
So that said, what do you think that whole experience prepared you for that you faced in the last 8 years since that time?
I think it helps you acquire security in yourself, like self assurance, which motherhood has now reshifted completely. But it does help you when you're put in situations that you never thought you would be and you're able to do them. It does give you self assurance and security in yourself and your ability about what you can do. With the law job, it's very safe, or in the aspect that you are in a desk for the most part, you are in a computer, you're maybe going to like offices or the court where there's like air conditioning and your workspace is I'm not saying the job is easy, but your environment is comfortable in the sense that you are not out in the sun, you're not working that hard part. Like I mentioned earlier, my enrollment or my task in the farm, the family farm, are mostly administrative, regulatory work. Like when I do get to do farm work, I will carry that 5 pound bag of feed. No problem. We have to go see the calves. No problem. I truly enjoy cows as an animal. I think they're spectacular. They're like just amazing. I always say you have to be more like the cow. They're like very unmuted, very unaffected by the environment in aspects of temperament. Like they're very cool, calm, collected. They're just chilling. They have food, but that whole aspect of like what you can do it, I think there's a saying for that, right? You don't really know what you're capable of until you have to. That's the definition of it. If you allow your mind to question your ability to do so instead of doing it, worry will consume you.
A period of time that no one could have ever predicted would bring about the challenges that it did with the hurricane and the 6 months that followed that. Wow, what an experience that took you to an entirely new level inside of yourself. So, when you think back about these recent years, no doubt was this one of the most challenging things that you could have ever experienced. But how about on the other side of that? What's the most satisfying experience that's come up?
So I worked a lot with the disaster recovery with the federal government after the hurricane here. So I worked all around the island with mostly the processing of aid and help, like paperwork and things like that, in my legal role. So I got to work a lot around the island with just disaster survivors. And obviously, you're working with disaster survivors, but you're a disaster survivor yourself. And that opened a lot of doors to like the adaptation, because you were taken to work in very remote areas that were even more damaged than my hometown. So that whole aspect with the dairy farm and also with the legal work side, it shifts you to what do I need as a bare minimum to do both jobs? Things like granting deeds and things that are usually done in a very protocol in an office way, you're all of a sudden doing underneath a baseball bench for a stadium, because that's where the refuge is. So it does take you to like really focus on what's necessary to get the task done at a bare minimum without the formalities. I think that's an implementation that I do even in my practice today. We do have a very fragile electric system after Maria. So power outages have been a common thing, even in the last year, even more so. That resilience that was needed and generated after that is also something that I think is, it does make you satisfied, that to know that. I think at a personal level, obviously becoming a mom is the most like satisfaction that I've had. That's a huge life goal that I've done in the sense that I've birthed a child. but it's still like a huge challenge every day. Like we talk, like you do feel like all that safety and security and self assurance in yourself has gone down the drain, and someone's telling you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, just by yelling. So that's the new thing, figuring it out. What does the cry mean and what's it for? And obviously, I'm very new to motherhood. So adjusting all my roles has been a thing. As part of YDLI, they put us to like try and grow the outreach of where you're developing. So that also pushed me to be in the board of the Puerto Rico Dairy Herd Improvement Association, which is a role that I have because of YDLI, because I was pushed to be in an organization. And also, I've taken on a more active role in the labor and employment division of the Puerto Rico Bar Association.
So, YDLI, Young Dairy Leaders Institute, which class were you a part of?
I graduated class 12.
So that would have been 2 years ago you graduated. Yeah. But since then, as you said, you've stepped up into some local leadership roles within the dairy community in Puerto Rico and also within the lawyer community.
I still to this day think that's like such an impactful program. I'm so grateful to have been a part of it. Not everything can be a Category 5 hurricane motivation for you to step out of your comfort zone. We don't want that. We can't handle that. So within the dairy farm, it's a family business, and my office is my own office. You do get comfortable in what you do. So having that type of experience will make you push yourself to step out of your comfort zone. And even though it's cliched, that's where growth truly happens, when you're stepping out of your comfort zone. So that was a great motivator to try and just be more present and be more active in those roles. Obviously, now with motherhood, I'm reeling those a little bit back in because there's a lot of attention that's needed in the home. But those are great sense of satisfaction too on a personal level. I think most dairy farmers would like more change in the business and in the industry to make sure that it's never been 100% secure business. There's always been a business with a lot of risk, but the amount of uncertainty right now, I think most dairy farmers would like to impact or control that, because even though Puerto Rico has its own particularities on how the milk industry here is regulated, and it's done because we do have a quota system, contrary to most states in the United States, like in the mainland, there's a higher regulation, so there's less control over what the milk price is and how that is regulated and what you get for your product in Puerto Rico, as opposed to maybe most states, as I've spoken to most of the dairy farmers that I consider colleagues in the States.
We've talked about the experiences in the last 8 years, the hurricane, that was just a life-changing experience. And even YDLI a couple of years back, that was a personal growth experience in a much gentler way than a hurricane. But when you look forward at the future, as a dairy farmer, as a lawyer, a business owner, and now also a mom, I want to push you to think about 5 years from now. What do you want to be saying is you've accomplished or achieved or seen through that brings you the most satisfaction?
I'd want to see myself with my daughter and my family's farm. I would love for it to still be the family farm. I would like to be more involved in this industry. I would like to still have my practice. I think in that aspect, I don't know how that's going to look in the future. Those type of experience let you know that like your time is the one thing that you're never really going to get back. So my priority right now will always be to reshift or try to have time with the family, because that's the most important thing for me. Trust that with all the highs and ups of where I've been in my life and my professional development up until now, it has been true that be open to what is going on, even though you don't understand it, because you're developing a skill. So I'm trusting not to know exactly how that's going to look 5 years from now. I would hope that it looks like that. But I'm trusting that even with motherhood, I'm gaining the skills that I need to develop to be where God's going to place me next, because those skills are going to be needed. I think we all want to reach our potential. We don't want wasted potential. We, I think most people would want to know that they're doing an impact in their communities and their work's helping people. Or for me, that's a big motivator with both. I have a passion for dairy because I truly believe that it is in the well being of the economy in Puerto Rico, of sustainability for Puerto Rico, because we import a high amount of the food that we consume here, about 85%. So anything produced locally is very important because those are things that don't have to come in through ship or plane. I truly believe in agriculture and farming in Puerto Rico and about the importance of it in an economical aspect and in an agriculture and sustainability aspect and in a safety aspect. And I truly hope that in my law practice, I'm helping people, right? People come with me because they need help. So whatever it is 5 years from now, I hope it's with my family and I hope it's to help people. If I'm exactly where I am at now, in 5 years, that's where I'm at. At this point in my life, I know that the most important thing is whatever time I have with my family. So that's my number one priority, even before becoming a mom, just like the relationship that I have, the time that I had with my grandparents, with the grandparents that I still have alive, with my parents, and now my daughter and my husband, which is like my own little family. And I am very appreciative of the time that I have because that's my downtime. I can be doing whatever it is. So they're like my number one priority at this time of my life, have worked a job that's not satisfying for a paycheck. And I think dairy farmers, this is such an uncertain industry. You really have to be in it because you're passionate about it, because you love this, because that paycheck is not enough. Most people would not be able to handle a full day of work in the farm. Dairy farmers or any sort of a head person, I don't think most people would be able to, in this day and age, find it as rewarding as most of these folks do. I find it to be a privilege when you get to work outside. You're in nature, you're interacting with these creatures that are just like amazing. And it's hard work. It's hard physical work. It's not a keyboard. And maybe they need to study farmers in general because these people still get that satisfaction from that. And it feels like more generations are being like pushed from the farm. They don't get to experience that. They're valuing satisfaction from other things, which is not wrong, but we are losing a very important role of professionals in the country, in Puerto Rico, and in the world. I think that's where I'm at now. I worked with people. When you're working with cows, they don't talk back to you. But when you work with people, you're always like answering someone's need. They need your help. So at the end of the day, I did get to get off early, like at least at 4 from the office. I always carry a beach chair in the back of my car. And if I had time, I'll go to the farm. I'll take the beach chair. I'll just find a pasture where the cows are going after the afternoon milking. And I'll just sit there, put the phone in airplane mode, have a bottle of water, and just sit there for the sunset or whatever time amount of time you have the rest of like until sunset or they finish milking. And that, even if it's 40 minutes, that just really resets you. I don't know what that's going to look like with my newborn after work because I think there's like this instinctual need or biological need to be with the baby. But I already took her to see the cow. So, and that was for me like core moment. That was like, this is like a life goal. I have a daughter and we're with the cows. She's looking at the cows, even though her sight is not fully developed yet. But for me, I am so overjoyed. Like,
That's your moment. I love that. That had to be such a satisfying moment for you of a culmination of your three roles, the professional woman, the dairy farmer, and now the mom. And the moment when you get to bring it all together and have your little baby girl, your future farmer or a future lawyer.
I'd rather her be a farmer than a lawyer. But as long as she's fully developed, she can do whatever she wants. Obviously, when you come from a family farm, that's sort of a legacy. And for me, the farm brings a lot of memories about my grandparents and just playing around with my cousins. It's a place that I have value. I can only hope that my daughter gets to experience something like that. I don't know if she will, but I can only hope that she does. Even if it's not that she still, I'm able to transmit those values to her. Because at the end of the day, like for us, the family is farm and the farm is family. So it's a big part of what I look into my family experience.
You talked a lot about family and just how important that is to you and how it's been a even more heightened priority now as you enter this phase of motherhood. But it was something that was always really important to you before too, and just fits hand in hand with how the farm has been such a part of your life, a part of your professional career, stepping into those roles, and a part of what you hope to be for the future as well. And you have chosen a path that it's not the easy one. You've chosen three different paths at the same time. And I think it's also very reflective of what a lot of other young women in dairy and far beyond are looking at too. They're looking at professional careers, possibly stepping back into a family business, owning a business, and also entering motherhood. So I'm just curious if you could offer any insight to young women out there that might be on a similar path, that are maybe in their 20s and looking ahead saying, wow, Chris's story is so inspiring. I want to be like her when I grow up. I'll raise my hand. I want to be like you when I grow up. But what would you say to a woman that wants to pursue a similar path to you?
First of all, I want to point out I didn't grow up particularly knowing I wanted to be X, Y, and Z. I wasn't one of those kids at 7 years old. I want to be a lawyer. Like, absolutely no one in my family is a lawyer. Like, my sister is, but growing up, I didn't have a role model to look that out. That's what a lawyer looks like. That's what I'm going to be. And I think you really do have to be open to those opportunities that show up in your life. Sometimes we are set in what we want, so set that we put on blinds and we're not able to see what's near, what other opportunities are near. And I would say be open, specifically in that age that you mentioned, that 20 to 30 age. There's so many opportunities that at that time you don't realize are a once in a lifetime opportunity. Because when you're 35 and you have family, you're not going to be able to do certain things. That's also not the period for you to do certain things. The period is that time when you're 20 to 30 and you have less obligations and less responsibility. So I would say take advantage and say yes to all the opportunities that you can, even if they don't align with a particular path down the line. Because in the diversity of skills that you are able to harvest and develop in that age gap, it's really going to set you up for whatever you do have in the future, right? So I think I was very impulsive maybe in that age. And I did say yes to a lot of things out of impulse without a clear idea of how that would benefit me in the future. And maybe if I wish I would have been more aware of those opportunities as skill development opportunities at that time, and I would have said yes to even more. So just look at that age, and maybe you do have a clear goal path of in your 20s of what it is you want to be looking at when you're 35. But even if you don't, that's fine as well. You're still developing. Just know that you're moving in that. Even when you feel you're stuck, looking for opportunities without a clear end goal is still progress, is still movement. You're still going to learn something. And as long as you're learning, you're always gaining. I always ask and pray to God that I never stop learning. I want to be an eternal student and just always learn, because the moment you think you don't have anything new to learn, you're useless. Obviously, family is important for me. I do have to shout out like my dad. If someone's taught me about work ethic, it's my dad. He's been in this business for the longest time, and even after my grandfather, and it's such an uncertain way, but he's definitely shown me that work ethic. He's always said, you work until the cows eat. And now I guess I'm going to see and find out how that applies into motherhood. But even to this day, with every progress that he has in his career, because as a dairy farmer, but also as a breeder, he's done some amazing things on the breeding and the genetics part of dairying and cattle breeding for dairy. So even yesterday, we got classified by the Brown Swiss Association, and we got an excellent 90 cow, which is just great for Puerto Rico. So I'm very proud of him, and I'm still like in awe that he's a young 60 something. I'm not going to throw him out, but he's a young 60 something. But even at this age, he's still breaking barriers and achieving goals professionally. And for me, that's so admirable. And he'll tell you that I'm always having a knife against his neck, but it's only because I think so highly of him. Like I'm always expecting of him. So that's the role model.
That is incredible. And what a great role model. And it sounds like you've emulated a few of his qualities, huh?
I would definitely hope so. At least the good. For him, family is important. For my grandfather, family is important. So I think that's where it comes from.
So the last question I had for you was to have you ask a question. So you're my first interview in this series. So what would you ask? The other women in this series are from different parts around the world, but they're all like you. They're all just knock it out of the park incredible. So women in dairy, women in business.
I think I would have two questions. I think one's personal. I really like to know what keeps them going when you're wearing out thin, what's going to make you get out of bed. And also, what's one thing they feel like could be done to guarantee continuity of this industry?
Those are good questions.
Those are my genuine questions. Those are not meant for you to be asked to me because I wouldn't know. Those are genuine questions.
Those are good. Okay. Well, I'll look forward to sharing responses from some of the other women in this series with you, Kris.
I look forward to hearing them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for all of your time and all of your energy and balancing it all literally during our conversation. You've left me inspired, and you'll leave many others inspired around the world. I can't wait to just see what else God has in store for you and the way that you are prepared to do so many things. But sometimes one of those things is just being really, really great right where you're at too. And enjoy these moments right now with a 5-week-old baby and preparing to get back to the professional world, but also making sure you get to spend some time with the cows and get out on that beach chair with a baby, a bottle of water, and your pasture full of cows.
I'm very much looking forward to that.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Kris. You just heard from Kritzia López Arvelo on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast International Women in Dairy Series. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep up-leveling your dairy.